Okay, good morning everybody. We are starting Daf Kaf Vav. We are going to begin with the very last line or two of Kaf Hey Amud Bet, even though we did them yesterday, just because that will segue us into this morning's Daf. We had the discussion of a room in which there is a Sefer Torah or Tefillin, that marital relations are not permitted unless they are one vessel inside another vessel, and furthermore, or if you remove them from the room. And then it said, Amar Abaye lo shanu ela b'kli she'eno kilyan, aval b'kli shu kilyan, afilu asara maneh kechad mana dameh. That if you have a container which is the designated container for that object, so even if there were 10 of them, that's only counted as one. In order to have two, when we talk about two coverings or a bag within a bag, a container within a container, it means that the outer container is not the designated container for the item. So for example, your tefillin bag is not considered, even if you have two tefillin bags. Let's say you put your tefillin in the plastic that they came in, and then you put that in the bag. That's still considered only one. That's not considered two, even though you could theoretically say it's two wrappings, it's only one. Amar Rava said, Glima. If you have a glima, akamtera means that you have some kind of a shelf, some kind of a structure that contains the sfarim, and you put over it a cloth, or you put some kind of a garment over it. That certainly counts as one over a second covering. In other words, that's considered two coverings. Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi said, Sefer Torah tzarich lasod lo mechitza asara. If you are going to engage in intimacy in a room that has a Sefer Torah in it, you need a mechitza asara. You need a wall of 10 tefachim separating between your room, the place where you're going to be in the bed, and the place where the Sefer Torah is going to be. Mar Zutra ikla lebe Rav Ashi. Once upon a time, Mar Zutra came to the house of Rav Ashi. Chazia leduchte de Mar bar Rav Ashi de manach be Sefer Torah. He saw that the room of Mar bar Rav Ashi, the son of Rav Ashi, had a Sefer Torah in it. And he saw that he had built a 10 tefach high mechitza. There was a separation there. Behind the separation was a Sefer Torah. And on the other side of the wall, this small wall of 10 tefachim, which is only about 3 feet, on the other side of the wall was his bed where he would be with his wife. And so Amarle, he said to him, Keman, Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. He said, according to whom are you doing this? Are you having this 10 tefachai mechitza separating your Sefer Torah from your bed? He said it must be according to Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, because Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi said that if you separate with a 10 tefach wall, a 3-foot high wall, you can have your bed, your marital bed, and your Sefer Torah in the same room. But he said to him, Mar damar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi deled le beta achrina. Mar ha'idle beta acharina. He said Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi was talking about a person who has no choice. In other words, he has a studio apartment. Okay, he has only one room. So in the one room, he wants to have his bed and he wants to have his Sefer Torah. He doesn't have another room in which to put it. And many people back then, as I mentioned in the Talmud, when it talks about bayit, it oftentimes is synonymous with room when it talks about house and room, because they had a one-room house. They didn't have multiple rooms in the house. So we're talking about studio apartments here. So you have the bed and you have the Sefer Torah in the same room because you have no choice. But you're rich. You have a multi-room house. You don't need to have your Sefer Torah in your bedroom. So for you, this law doesn't apply. That only applies for somebody who has no alternative. So he said to him, you know what? Amarle lava data. You know what? I didn't think of that. You're right. He confessed he had made an error. He said, I looked at the technical halakha. Technical halakha was I could put a mechitza. I could put a divider of only 3 feet between myself and the Sefer Torah. But now I recognize that since I have another option, which is to take the Sefer Torah completely out of the bedroom, that's what I should have done. Kama yarchik adam. Kama yarchik mehenu min hatzoar ba'amot. We said in the Mishnah, how far do you have to be from smelly water or from excrement to say the Shema? We said 4 amot. Amar Rava said, Amar Rav Schora, that Rav Schora said, Amar Rav Huna, that Rav Huna said, Lo shanu ela la'achorav. That's only true if the excrement is behind you. Aval lifanav marchik milo enav. However, if it's in front of you, if you can actually see it, you have to be far away enough that it's no longer within your range of vision. V'chein latfilah, the same is true with prayer. So all of the halachot about distance from excrement only apply if it's either to the side or behind you, preferably behind you. If it's in front of you and you can still see it and it's not covered, that's no good. But remember, covering means even a glass cover. So even though you could see it, as long as it's covered, it's okay, even if it's in front of you. But if it's uncovered and in front of you, then 4 amot is not enough. You have to be outside of the range of vision to be able to say the Shema or to pray. Any, is that true? Amar Rafram bar Papa, Amar Rav Chisda. But Rafram bar Papa said that Rav Chisda said, Omed Adam keneged bet hakiseh umitpalel. He said you could stand facing the bathroom and pray. So that would imply that even though it's in front of you, it's not a problem, as long as you have a sufficient distance between yourself and the bathroom. No, we're assuming not now. We're assuming it's open, but you're facing the open bathroom area. Okay, now remember, their bathroom was just a wall, and on the other side was where people would go. So you're facing that area that's a dirty area. Apparently you're able to pray there, and the assumption would be that that's provided that you are 4 amot away. You're not right in front of it, but you are some distance, let's say 6 feet away, facing it. So that would imply that even though it's in front of you, it's not a problem. So he says, that's talking about a bet kiseh that doesn't have any excrement in it. In other words, it's totally clean bathroom. So since it's a totally clean bathroom, you can pray facing that bathroom and it's not a problem. But if there's actual excrement in front of you, even if it is more than 6 feet in front of you, that's no good. Really? Amar Rav Yosef bar Chanina bet hakiseh she'amru afal pi she'en bo tzo'ah. That can't be true, because Rav Yosef already told us that if you have a bathroom, okay, even if it's clean at that moment, if you have a merchatz, you have a bathhouse where people are generally unclothed, even if there's nobody there at that moment, you can't say berachot, you can't say the Shema, you can't pray in those areas. It doesn't matter right now what's going on in that place. What matters is that it's a place that is used for those purposes. So then in what case was it stated by Rav Chisda originally that you can face a bathroom and pray, if we're saying that there's no difference between a clean bathroom and a dirty bathroom? So it must be talking about a new bathroom. In other words, you designed it's a brand new bathroom, it's never been used. After all, it's still a bathroom, but the bathroom's never actually been used before. So in that case, you can face that spot and you can pray, even though you're facing a bathroom. So let's say you could use our bathrooms as an example, but they're not really a good example for another reason that we're going to see in a minute. But if you were to think about, these areas out in the field that they would use for bathrooms, okay, let's say they've established a new area that's going to be used for bathroom purposes, but it hasn't been used yet. So you can face there and pray because there's actually nothing there yet. But in an area that's been used, even if it's even if it's clean at this moment, it's not going to be good enough. Okay? But what about the question that was asked to Ravina? They had asked Ravina this question. If you designate an area as a bathroom, does that count or not? Or are we only concerned about a bathroom once it's used? Or is the very fact that you've designated this area as a bathroom sufficient to make it a problem? And you're saying
you have Home Depot and you're facing the toilet.
The pretend bathrooms. Right. The models.
Right, the models,
Right. So that's a question because those models are not really meant to be used. They're just models.
No. You're building a house. No, but I'm talking about the toilets that are in the box.
Oh, that are in the box.
Right, or even exposed.
Right. So that's going to be an interesting question because we're going to see in a minute that our toilets are a little bit of a different issue. Okay. So that's why I didn't want to go there because I didn't want to use that example because we're going to see why in a second. So. That basically you have the halacha is like this, and this is actually the halacha that's brought in Shulchan Aruch. If you have a bathroom that's never been used, okay, you hire a construction company, they build you a brand new house, including a bathroom. Okay, the bathroom's right there. The halacha would be you can pray facing that bathroom with the door open, but you can't pray inside the bathroom. That's chadati. If it's brand new, you can't pray in there because it's designated to be a bathroom. But you can pray facing it because it's not actually dirty and it's never been used. If it's ever been used, even if it's clean at this moment, you still can't pray facing it if the door is open. that if it's never been used, it's just designated to be a bathroom, you can pray facing it, even with the door open, but you can't pray inside it. That's the halacha that the Shulchan Aruch brings.
On the side, like on the technical of that, when the bathroom is used and you're in a room,
the door should be closed.
But even if you're not facing it?
The door should preferably be closed, because then you have other issues about being within 6 feet and.
But if you're 6 feet away and
your back is to it, let's say, so then it would be okay, right? So then it would be okay. So, preferably back. I mean, we said that you can only use the side solution if there's no way for you to move forward. Right? But if you can move forward, you should move forward and have it behind you. So yeah, that would be a case. Now, here's the interesting point that makes our bathrooms a little bit more of a question, because Amar Rava said, Hane bate kisa'e de parsa'e. Okay, the Persian bathrooms, apparently the Persians had developed some plumbing that was a little bit more advanced. You know, I'm not surprised. Aval gav de'id behud so'ah, even though it has excrement in there, Kistumin damud, it's considered like it's covered. Why? Because they basically had a system that when you would go to the bathroom, it would immediately carry whatever waste there was into a sewer beneath the ground. So it's very similar to what we have. It's basically exactly what we have, like flushing. In fact, ours is even better in a way, because we have water there, so that there's not even any residue, hopefully. It washes it all down immediately. So it's not even meant to hold anything there. Okay, so most of the poskim say that our bathrooms are considered like the bathrooms of the Parsim, the bathrooms of the Persians, which remove the waste immediately and are therefore not. If you have a clean bathroom, that there's no residue in there and there's nothing in there, one of our bathrooms, that you would be allowed even to say a bracha in there, if it's clean. Now, the only problem is in a public bathroom, I would say. See, in a private bathroom where you actually keep it clean, fine. In a public bathroom, unfortunately, people are not as careful. There's a lot of residue of various things, and it's not kept in the state that it should be. So there you have an actual substance of a problem there. But in a private bathroom, that's why the best example of a real Beit Kisei is like in Penn Station, like I said before, New York City or something like that. That's serious Beit Kisei. If you're in a bathroom, one of our bathrooms, that it immediately flushes out the waste. So the Ramah says in the Shulchan Aruch that if people only use the toilet to go to the bathroom, which hopefully they do, so then you're okay. But if people sometimes miss, or they're not exactly accurate about where they're supposed to be depositing what they're depositing, then you have a problem. It's on the floor, it's here and there, then you have an issue.
Did you say it's clean?
If it's totally clean, you could even say a bracha in there, because that's in the Shulchan Aruch. It says in the Shulchan Aruch. And most of every posek that I've seen, every modern posek has agreed that if it's a private bathroom where you know that it's totally clean, that there's nothing in there right now, there's nothing on the floor, that it wouldn't be a problem.
Or a German gasoline station.
Oh, is it like that too? And attendants 24 hours. Yeah, I mean, there are some cases where people are really, really fastidious about that, or some hotels or whatever, where they're extremely clean. You could argue the same. And this is relevant because sometimes you have a situation where you feel like you need to wash your hands in the bathroom and need to say netilat yadayim if you're in a place where you don't have any other option besides the bathroom and it's a totally clean bathroom. So according to the Shulchan Aruch, you would actually be allowed to say the beracha in there. But you have to make sure that it is as clean as you expect it to be. So the next Mishnah, as we finally conclude issues of the body and bodily functions, this Mishnah actually came up earlier in our discussion in this perek. Zav shira'a keri. If you have a zav is a person who has a certain emission coming from him, which is not a seminal emission. It's not the emission that was the discussion we were having before. This is zivut, which is a condition that's a more severe tum'ah. It's an abnormal condition. It's not a normal condition. And this condition requires 7 clean days, and then immersion in mayim chayim. Actually, even a mikveh is not good enough for the zav. He has to go into an actual living water, actual flowing water, in order to become tahor. The Torah tells us.
What's the zav shira'a keri? Isn't a zav?
No, a zav is a totally different thing. A zav is a different image. Right. It's a different flow.
So they're talking about a zav
who also had relations and So that's what we had this actually earlier. It was already discussed earlier in the Gemara that the chidush here is that even though the zav is already tameh, and now he has to carry emission, and you might say, well, why does he need to go to the mikveh? I mean, it's not going to help him. He's still tameh, right? Or nida. you have a woman, nida shepalta shechvat zera, the woman who had relations and then went into the state of nida anyway, so she's already tame'ah, and now some of the semen comes out, so therefore she also, under the takanat Ezra, has to go to the mikveh before she can say berachot, and before she be able to say the Shema, etc. So what do we do in those cases? So, or v'amishameshet sherata nida, or similarly one who has relations, and then goes into nida. It's all the same case, okay? Basically where you have a situation where a person is tameh for another reason anyway, and now they have a condition that under the takanat Ezra they would have to go to the mikveh. So tzrichin tevilah, according to the Tanakama, even though this immersion is not going to help the woman or the man become tahor, still they have to go, because the takanat Ezra didn't discriminate between situations in which the person would become tahor and wouldn't become tahor. It's a separate takana. It's a separate rule that one who has a seminal emission has to go to the mikveh before they say Hashem's name or learn Torah. Doesn't matter if they're going to become tahor or not. Okay? However, as we learned earlier in the Masekhet Rabbi Yehuda Poter, Rabbi Yehuda was lenient. He said, no, if the person is tameh for another reason, so that this immersion is not really going to make them tahor, they don't have to go to the mikveh even under the takanat Ezra. The takanat Ezra was for a person who is only tameh because the only bodily condition they have that makes them tameh is the emission that they have, nothing else. But if a person is tameh because they're in nida or because they are azav, so then they wouldn't go to the mikveh according to Rabbi Yehuda, even if they had a seminal emission. So that's what we learned earlier. So the Gemara says, Ibailu, they asked the following question: Bal keri sheraziva le Rabbi Yehuda mahu. What would happen? The question is, if the bal keri happened first. In other words, the person has marital relations and then becomes a zav. So we had the obligation to go to the mikveh under the rule of Ezra already. And then he became tameh for another reason. Does that becoming tameh for another reason knock out the original obligation he had to go to the mikveh? Or do we say no? Since his obligation predated becoming a zav, so he should still go to the mikveh, even though now it's not going to help him get out of being a zav, but he already had the obligation beforehand. So we know when he was a zav before he became a balkari, so he already had this underlying condition, and then he has marital relations. There, according to Rabbi Yehuda, he won't now get a new obligation to go to the mikveh. But what if he had it already? So that's the question. So the Gemara says, it fleshes out the question. Ki pata Rabbi Yehuda hatam bazav shira akeri dem ikara lav bar tevilahu. Aval bal keri shira aziva dem ikara bar tevilahu mechayev. So do we say that when did Rabbi Yehuda exempt the person from going to the mikveh? Only when he was a zav first, and then he had marital relations or whatever. So he doesn't acquire an obligation to go to the mikveh because he was already exempt. But where he had marital relations first, and he became a balkari, and he had the obligation to go to the mikveh, becoming a zav is not going to now get him out of the obligation that he already had. Or do we say, Odilma, lo shena, or maybe it doesn't make a difference. And in both cases, the fact that right now he's a zav, and going to the mikveh is not going to ameliorate that, means that he doesn't need to go to the mikveh even for the seminal emission that he had beforehand. Okay? So what does the Gemara say? Tashma, come and listen. You can actually infer it straight out of the Mishnah. Hamishameshet v'rata nida tzrichat tevilah v'Rabbi Yehuda poter. So, because there were three cases in the Mishnah. One was the zav who afterwards has an emission. The other one was a nida who afterwards has the seminal emission that she can have, where it comes out afterwards, right? It comes out of her body. And then the third case was hamishameshet v'rata nida, the woman who had relations and then became a nida. In other words, her being a balat keri, so to speak, preceded her being a nida, having a more stringent impurity. So, what do you see there? V'hamishamesh v'rata nida kebal keri shirazivadamya v'kapata Rabbi Yehuda shemamina. Because the case of a woman who has marital relations and then becomes a nida is the same as the man who has marital relations and then becomes a zav. In both cases, okay, the seminal emission component preceded the more stringent tum'ah, and nonetheless, Rabbi Yehuda says, once that more stringent tum'ah comes along, the person is no longer expected to go to the mikveh, even for the keri that they had. Tani Rabbi Chaya behedya, and in fact Rabbi Chaya said explicitly, Balkeri sharaziva tzarich tivila ve'Rabbi Yehuda poter, that the rabbis say, the Tanakh Kama says, that a Balkari, a person who had a seminal emission or had marital relations, and then became a Zav, is still obligated to go to the mikveh according to the rabbis, but Rabbi Yehuda exempts even in that case. So the point is that according to Rabbi Yehuda, the only thing we look at is the moment of immersion. If at the moment of immersion, that person is not going to become pure because of Zav and Nida.
Can you also see from the fact that it's not, you don't consider Tum'ah to just be Tum'ah? In other words, there are levels of Tum'ah. Like you can remove a certain amount of Tum'ah and be left with.
Well, that's the thing. You can't really. I mean, the question really here is really when they right, exactly, when they set up the takana. Did he set up the takana under the normal rubric of the laws of purity and impurity? In which, if you were a Balkari normally, you wouldn't go to the mikveh if you were also a Zav, because you're not going to become tahor. So what's the point? It doesn't do anything.
Right.
Okay, you're still tameh. So Rabbi Yehuda is interpreting the takanat Ezra as under the rubric of the normal laws of purity and impurity. So under the laws of purity and impurity, normally it would make sense for the person to go to the mikveh, even though in an ordinary case you would only do that if you were going to the Beit HaMikdash. So he says you should do it even to say Hashem's name and learn Torah. But if under the normal laws of purity and impurity you wouldn't go because you're impure for another reason, so then Rabbi Yehuda says you don't go. The rabbis say no. The Takanav Ezra was a totally independent institution. It was based on the laws of Tumah v'Tahora, but it's not formulated under that framework. So even if under the laws of Tumah v'Tahora normally you would not go to the mikveh, there's a separate independent obligation to go.
But even if it was independent,
because of this,
even if it was independent, the goal of that was to become tahor.
Not technically tahor. In other words, the rabbis are saying the goal is not to become technically tahor. The goal is a separate concept to instill reverence when a person says Hashem's name and they pray. So it's a totally separate phenomenon. You see, Rabbi Yehuda is trying to consolidate basically and say that this all fits under the rubric of purity and impurity, so it has to make sense within that framework.
So the rabbis say that even if it's before or after...
It doesn't matter at all. You always have to go because it's a totally separate halacha. It's a spin-off of the laws of purity and impurity, but in essence, it's a separate halacha of tefillah.
Did that carry the day in those times? Is that the halacha?
Yeah, that was the halacha on that day. And nowadays, that's why we go on Erev Yom Kippur, or why we go, because we say that even though it doesn't work to make us tahor, we can still, we can pray like that.
Yoma, that we learn on Yom Kippur, but about Kiri.
Right, on Yom Kippur, yeah. So Hadran alach mishemeto, we finish the third parak of Berachot, and we go on to the fourth parak. Now there's just a very interesting intro to this, is that one should note that according to Rashi had a very interesting text of the Talmud Bavli in which the third parak and the fourth parak were reversed. According to Rashi, what we just learned was actually the fourth parak of Berachot, and what we're about to learn is actually the third parak of Berachot. Tosafot and the other Rishonim had the version that we have, which is that what we just learned was the third parak, and we're about to learn the fourth. And you can understand why Rashi would reverse it, and what the argument would be to keep it this way. The argument to keep it the way that we have it is that we just got done with a parak that talked a lot about the Shema. And the first two parakim were about the Shema primarily. And this last parak was also, a lot of it was about the Shema. This coming, the next two parakim are primarily about tefillah. They're primarily about prayer, not about the Shema. So one could say, well, now we're done with issues related to the Shema, we're moving on to Tefillah. On the other hand, Rashi would argue that no, this parak should go before, because we should first learn about the Shema and Tefillah. And what was the parak we just learned? It was about all kinds of exemptions from Tefillah. Oh, if somebody passed away, if somebody has an emission of a certain sort, or if somebody's in a place where there's excrement, if somebody's in a dirty place. So these are all technicalities that apply both to Shema and to Tefillah. So that's why Rashi had the chapter we're about to learn before the chapter that we just learned. But in any case, it's just an interesting thing to note. Tefillat hashachar ad chatzot. The tefillah of the morning can be done until chatzot, until midday. Rabbi Yehuda omer ad daled sha'ot, according to Rabbi Yehuda, until the fourth hour of the day. Tefillat mincha ad ha'erev. The prayer of mincha can be done until evening, which means until sunset. Rabbi Yehuda omer ad pelaga mincha. Rabbi Yehuda says until the pelaga mincha, which I'll explain in a second. Tefilat Erev en lakeva. Tefilat Erev, the evening prayer, has no established time, would seem to be the meaning of keva, although the Gemara is going to explain it differently. But basically it means you can say Tefilat Arvit all night long. V'shel Musafim kol hayom, and the Tefilah of Musaf is all day long. It has in parentheses here Rabbi Yehuda Omer ad Zayin Sha'ot, which is in fact the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, but apparently there's a question as to whether that was in the Mishnah or not. Now, what are the hours here being discussed? We have to keep in mind, I'm not going to repeat this every time because it becomes very laborious to repeat it every time. I'm just going to say it as a disclaimer. Whenever we talk about hours in halakha, we're not talking about the hours on the clock. We're talking about something called sha'ot zemaniyot, which means if you had a perfect day where sunrise was at 6 a.m., sunset was at 6 p.m., then it would follow our clock. The first hour would end at 7, second hour would end at 8, third hour would be 9, fourth hour would be 10, fifth hour would be 11, and sixth hour would be at 12 noon in a perfect day. However, in the real days, in most days, it doesn't work out that way. Most days are either a little bit longer than 12 hours, as much as 14 or 15 hours of daylight you might have in the summertime. Some days are even shorter. You might only have 10 hours of daylight or less in the wintertime. And in that case, the way that we calculate the zmanim, the times, is we subdivide the daylight hours into 12 parts. So an hour could actually be 45 minutes sometimes in the winter. Sometimes an hour can be an hour and 15 minutes in the summer. So if you look at a luach, if you look at a calendar that shows you when the Kriyat Shema is allowed to be read, we know it's allowed to be read up to the third hour. But that doesn't mean 9 o'clock on the clock. It means the third halachic hour. So sometimes that could be as late as 10-something. Because the size of the hour varies with the length of the day. Because it's really a chelek of an hour. It's not that you can read Shema until the third hour, until 9 a.m. It's that you can read the Shema until a quarter of the daylight. Okay? It's not that Rabbi Yehuda is saying you can say the tefillah until 10 o'clock in the morning. He's saying you can read it until a third of the daylight hours. It's not that the rabbis are saying you can read the tefillah until 12 o'clock, noon. They're saying you can read it until exactly the midpoint of the daylight hours. Okay, and there's also an argument about whether daylight hours are calculated from sunrise to sunset, which I favor because it's what the Rambam says. Some people say Amud HaShachar till Tzeit HaKochavim. Some say it's from dawn till when the stars come out, which adds a significant amount onto the number. It adds like another almost 2 hours onto the calculation and starts the count of the daylight hours 72 minutes earlier. The Gra and the Rambam are the same. And if you look at the Luach and it says Magen Avraham, that's counting all the way from 72 minutes earlier. It's counting from Amud HaShachar, from dawn. And that's why the end time for Kriyat Shema for the Magen Avraham is always much earlier. So in any case, this is the laws of Tefillah here. So we learn that on Tefillat HaShachar there's an argument between the rabbis and Rabbi Yehuda as to the cutoff time. With regard to Mincha, there's also an argument about the cutoff time. With Rabbi Yehuda saying Palaga Mincha. What's Palaga Mincha? Basically, what that means is if you divide the afternoon hours, you have 6 hours in the afternoon. And again, we're always talking about halachic hours here. But 6 hours afternoon. So if you divide that in half, what you have is, you end up having something that's called the Mincha Ketana and Mincha Gedolah. Mincha Gedolah is the earlier part of the Mincha time. And then from 3:30 to 6 o'clock on a perfect day, from 3:30 to 6 o'clock is called Mincha Ketana, the small Mincha. That was the later time. That was when the korban of the afternoon was actually usually brought in the Beit HaMikdash, around that time, around 3:30. No, Mincha Gedolah is early, Mincha Ketana is later. And that is 2.5 hours. If you split that in half, okay, so you have 2.5 hours, so you split it into an hour and a quarter, that's what Plag Mincha is. So Plag Mincha would be on a perfect day, 4:45 would be Plag Mincha on a perfect day. Because 3:30 is the beginning of Mincha Ketana, an hour and 15 minutes later is 4:45, that's Plag Mincha. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, you have to finish Mincha an hour and a quarter before sunset. The rabbis say you can go all the way up to sunset. Alright, so now we'll get to the Gemara.
When can you start?
You can start anytime, a half hour after midday, because it has to be once the sun starts moving in the sky towards its ultimate destination. It's about 6.5 hours, or it's the midpoint through the 7th hour, right? So 12:30 on a perfect day, which usually ends up being 1 something, in an hour. But yeah. So, Uraminu, they raised an objection. Mitzvata imanetzachama, kadesh yismoch geula latfilah v'nimtza mitpalel bayom. We learned that the mitzvah is to pray shacharit at hanetzachama, at sunrise. What is this nonsense about 4th hour, 10 o'clock in the morning, 12 o'clock? I mean, it's supposed to be at sunrise. So it says, that's talking about the Vatikin, who were the very pious people, who were especially midakdek b'mitzvot. They wanted to be very particular about doing a mitzvah in the best way. For them, it was sunrise. For everybody else, b'di'avad, the Rambam says anything after hanetzachama is b'di'avad. If you can't do it, you do it later. The Amar Rabbi Yochanan, as Rabbi Yochanan said, Vatikin ayu gomrin ota imanetzachama. As Rabbi Yochanan said, they would finish the Shema right before sunrise, so they could say the Amidah starting exactly at sunrise. Okay, v'chule alma ad chatzot v'tulo. Is it really true that you can only say shacharit until midday, until noon? Ve'amar Rav Mari b'rei de Ravuna b'rei de Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Did not Rav Mari, the son of Rav Huna, the son of Rabbi Yirmiyah, the son of Abba, say that Rabbi Yochanan said, Ta'av v'lo itpalel arvit, mitpalel shacharit shtayim, shacharit mitpalel b'mincha shtayim. Apparently, you have a lot of time, because if you missed arvit, you pray in the morning double. And what are you praying? You're praying shacharit and arvit. Okay, if you miss shacharit, you pray mincha twice. What are you praying? Mincha and shacharit. So apparently you can pray shacharit even in the afternoon. There's no cutoff in there.
But when they say that, I mean, they read the Amidah, they don't mean the whole...
Just the Amidah, just the Amidah, yeah. Whenever they say tefillah in the Talmud, it's only Amidah. Right. So, kule yoma mitzali v'azil. True. Really, you can pray all day long. It's always a good time to pray. Ad chatzot yahaveh le'sechar tefillah bizmana. If you pray before midday, you get the benefit, you get the reward of tefillah in its proper time. But mikan ve'elach, sechar tefillah yahavele, sechar tefillah bizmana lo yahavele. You get the benefit of prayer, but not tefillah bizmana. In other words, it has an ideal time. The ideal time is in the morning. If you miss the morning, now you can pray it in the afternoon. The only thing is, when you pray it in the afternoon, it has to be after mincha. Right? It's called tashlumin. We call it making up for the shacharit. So you pray the Amidah of mincha, and then immediately after you pray the Amidah of shacharit. But you don't get credit for having said shacharit in its proper time if you decide to do it in the afternoon. If you forget and you do it in the afternoon. So actually, according to halacha, we have 3 zmanei tefillah for shacharit. The way that we rule is that you should do it at hanetzachama. That's the ideal of sunrise. If you can't do that, then definitely before 10 a.m. or before the 4th hour, the 4th halachic hour. And if you miss that, you can still say it up to chatzot. You can still say it up to midday, but you can no longer say the blessings of Kriyat Shema once you have passed the 4th hour of the day. So that's what the halacha is that's brought in Shulchan Aruch. Now, the Gemara goes on. They asked the following question. Is it also true that if you forgot mincha, you can pray arvit twice, you can pray the Amidah of arvit twice, and make up for it? I understand why if I forget to pray arvit, then in the morning I can pray 2 Amidah of shacharit, and come out fulfilling arvit and shacharit. Why? Because it's the same halachic day. The day starts at night. But over here, mincha and arvit actually are not in the same day. Because mincha, let's say if you say mincha on Friday, and then when you say arvit, it's Shabbat. It's a new day. The nighttime is a new day. So maybe one could argue that you can't make up for mincha at arvit. If you forgot mincha and you come to arvit, and now you want to repeat the Amidah in order to fulfill mincha, maybe you could argue that you can't do that because it's a new day. O dilma, or maybe kevan detzlota rahamehi, since prayer is asking for mercy and is therefore always appropriate. It's not really limited by time. Anytime you want, you should be able to pray freely. In other words, we don't follow the laws of korbanot. There's a principle of avar yomo batal korbano. If you miss the day, you miss the korban. So you could say you missed mincha, you missed that day's korban, it's over. It's a new day. Or you could say, no, tefillah, when we're talking about tefillah, we shouldn't be restricted by the rules of korbanot. We should say that tefillah is always appropriate. So even though you missed mincha, you make up for it at arvit. So what's the answer? Tashma. The Gemara says, come and listen. Amar Rav Huna bar Yehuda. Rav Huna, the son of Yehuda, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, said that Rabbi Yitzchak said, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, that Rabbi Yochanan said, Ta'a, velo itpalel mincha mitpalel arvit shtayim, ve'en bazeh mishum da'avar yomo batal korbano. He said that if you miss mincha, then at arvit, you say the arvit prayer, you say the amidah, and then you go back and you say a second amidah to make up for mincha, and we don't say that since you missed mincha, the day is over and you missed the korban. Metive, they raised an objection. Me'uvat lo yuchal litkon, it says, quoting the pasuk from Kohelet, a bent thing cannot be fixed. Ve'chesron lo yuchal lihimanot, and a missing thing cannot be counted. Me'uvat lo yuchal litkon, what does it mean a bent thing cannot be fixed? Zeh shebitel kriyat shema shel arvit, kriyat shema shel shacharit. O tefillah shel arvit, o tefillah shel shacharit. That means somebody who missed the kriyat shema of the night, or of the day, or he missed the prayer of the night, or the prayer of the morning. Okay? Implying that once you missed it, it can't be fixed. And what does it mean something that's missing can't be counted? It means if your friends get together to do a mitzvah, and they say, hey, come do a mitzvah with us, and you miss the opportunity, that's it. You can't be counted in the mitzvah, you missed it, okay? But the point of quoting this here is it sounds like if you miss arvit or shacharit, there's no making up for it. Because it says there's no way to straighten a bent thing. So answer, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yitzchak said that Rabbi Yochanan said, what are we talking about over here? Shebitel b'mezid. If the person purposely said, I'm not going to shacharit, and then they say, you know what, now it's mincha, maybe I should make up for it. I feel bad, I didn't do shacharit. Too late. Or arvit, they said, you know what, I'd rather go to sleep early. I'm going to skip arvit and I'll pray twice in the morning. They can't. If you purposely miss it, it's no good. Bishogeg or anus. If something out of your control, you're stuck in traffic and you can't pull over and there's no way, so you can't pray, or whatever the situation is, you had a medical emergency, God forbid. So in any case where you don't have the ability to get to pray, that's anus, or shogeg, you forgot and all of a sudden you missed mincha. So in those cases you can make up for it. But in a case where you purposely neglected it, there's no going back. Amar Rav Asher said, Daikanami, we can also bring a proof for this, because Dikatani bitel velo katani ta'ab. Because what did it say in that statement that a bent thing cannot be straightened? It said this is somebody who neglects, shebitel, who, so to speak, nullifies arvit and shacharit. It has the sense of somebody who does it on purpose. In other words, they purposely neglected to do it. That's why it can't be made up for. But if you miss it by accident or against your will, you can make up for it. Shema mina. Therefore, we see that there's a difference here. Now, when a person makes up for the amidah, they read the amidah. Let's say the person missed arvit by accident. They come to shacharit. They pray shacharit. They do the amidah. Right after the amidah, they say ashrei, and then say the second amidah, having in mind to fulfill what they missed the night before. Now we move to Kafvav Amud Bet. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Tavlo itpalel mincha ba'erev Shabbat. What happens if a person missed mincha on erev Shabbat? They're running late, they missed mincha. So why is it a problem? Because you're going to say two amidot, right, at arvit. But the arvit prayer is not the same as mincha. Because mincha is a weekday prayer. Arvit is a Shabbat prayer. If you repeat the Shabbat prayer twice, that's not what you would have said at mincha. Still, mitpalel b'leil Shabbat shtayim, it doesn't matter. Okay, you can still make up for it. You repeat the arvit of Leil Shabbat twice. Ta'a v'lo itpalel mincha b'Shabbat mitpalel b'motzei Shabbat shtayim. Same thing goes. You had a really long Shabbat nap, You didn't wake up in time for mincha. You wake up, Shabbat is over. Now it's motzei Shabbat. And you might say to yourself, well, if I pray the motzei Shabbat amidah twice, I'm not saying what I would have said on Shabbat. I'm saying a totally different thing. I'm saying motzei Shabbat. Still, you can make up for it, because it's all one obligation of tefillah. It's true that the text is different, and now obviously you can't say the Shabbat prayer, but the obligation of prayer is the same. So you can make up.
Twice though, right?
Well, that's what it's going to say.
Oh, right.
That's going to say. It says that what you do is, so you do shtaim shel chol, mavdil barishona, ve'ino mavdil bashniya. Okay? You say atachonantanu in the first one, because the first one is really your arvit prayer. The second one is making up for mincha, so you don't say atachonantanu in the second one. Okay? Hivdil bashniya velo hivdil barishona. If you messed up and you did the reverse, it's a big problem. Okay? Why? Because shniya alatalo, rishonalo alatalo. If you knew you had to do 2 amidot, you did the first one and you didn't say atachon antanu. The second one you did, you said, oh, whoops, I didn't say atachon antanu, I'd better say it in the second one now, I forgot. Now you made a mistake because you canceled your first one. Because you're saying that you want the second one to be arvit. Oh, you want the second one to be arvit. So now the first one doesn't count for anything. So now you have to again repeat if you want to make up for mincha, because the first one gets canceled. Okay? So read aloud. So the interesting thing is that the halacha is that if you don't say havdalah, if you don't say atachon antanu in either one, it's okay. The only problem is when you didn't say havdalah in the first one, and you did in the second one, that you basically cancel out the first one and say it wasn't arvit. Yeah, what did you want to say?
Well, it's related, but it's on a different...
Okay.
If you mentioned, right, you had your meal from Shabbos.
Right, and now it's nighttime.
Now it's nighttime.
Right.
You included Shabbos?
Yeah, because you started the meal on Shabbat.
So there it works the other way.
Yeah, that's because you're not making up for something there. We're just completing a meal that you started on Shabbat, so it was a Shabbat meal. So lememra dekevan delo avdil bakamaita keman delo taledame. But wait a second, you're implying that the first prayer. Now this is a guy who missed mincha on Shabbat. Now he prayed 2 amidot of arvit. The first one he didn't say atachon antanu, which is the Motzei Shabbat prayer, the Havdalah in the Amidah. The second one he did. So you're saying that the first one doesn't count? You're saying that it doesn't count? Umadrinan lane, you're going to make him go back now. Because the first one doesn't count. But Uraminu will raise an objection to that. If a person forgot to mention Mashif HaRuach U'Mored HaGeshem in the Amidah, U'She'ela B'Birkat Tashanim, or he forgot to say Barech Aleinu during the winter time, he forgot to say V'tein Talu Matar, he forgot to ask for rain, Machzirin Oto, then he has to go back. But Havdalah B'Chonen Adat in Machzirin Oto, Mipnei She'yachol Omra Alakos. But when it comes to Atachon Antanu, we know if you forgot to say Atachon Antanu on Motzei Shabbat, you say in a regular case, if you said Arvit and you forgot to say Atachon Antanu, you don't have to go back and repeat the Amidah. You just wait till you say the regular Havdalah on the cup. You don't have to go back. So why here are we saying that this guy who neglected to say Atachon Antanu in his first Amidah, it doesn't count for him, only the second one where he said Atachon Antanu is going to count? That doesn't make sense. Normally if he omitted it, it wouldn't make a difference. So what's the answer? What does the Gemara say? Very interesting. Kashya, you're right. We don't know. That's the halacha, but we don't know. Now the Rif, very interestingly, the Rif comes along in his comments, in his halachot, and he explains it. He says there's a reason. Because if you omitted it from both, it wouldn't be a problem. The problem is, because if you say nothing, you're okay. The problem is because you omitted it from the first one, and then you went ahead and said it in the second one. You should have kept your mouth shut in the second one. Okay? Because by saying it in the second one, you're effectively saying, this is arvit. If you didn't say it in the first one or the second one, you would have been fine. But the fact that you didn't say it in the first one, and that was supposed to be your arvit, and the second one was supposed to be your mincha, you said it, so now you basically said, oh, that first one wasn't really arvit, this is my real arvit. That's the problem. That's why it's worse than a case when you don't say it at all. When you don't say it at all, it's actually fine. Then you have to go and say Havdalah on the cup, like a regular case. Itmar, it was stated, Rabbi Yossi bar Rabbi Chanina Amar. Now here we get into a very interesting discussion. Tefilot avot tiknum. Where did we get the idea of 3 prayers in a day? From the patriarchs. Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi Amar, Tefilot keneged temidin tiknum, which is the most commonly believed view. That where do we get the 3 prayers? From the korbanot. Okay? Because one corresponds to the morning prayer, the morning korban, the tamid shel shachar. One is the regular korban of the afternoon, tamid shel ben arba'in. And the third one is that they would burn on the altar in the night whatever was left over from the sacrifices of the day. So that's why we have arvit, and of course musaf, because of the korban musaf, the extra sacrifice. So v'tanya kivatei de Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina, v'tanya kivatei de Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. There are braitot supporting both of these views. How so? There's a braita that supports Rabbi Yossi bar Rabbi Chanina, who said that it was the patriarchs who created the prayers, because it says Avraham tiken tfilat shacharit. It says Avraham was the one who started the morning prayer. Shenemar vayeshkem Avraham baboker el makom asher amad sham ven amida el tfilah, because it says Avraham got up in the morning And he went back to he stood in the same place he had been in the night before, the day before. And this was after the destruction of Sodom. He went to the same place that he had stood. And stood means prayer. Shenemar vayamod Pinchas vayfalel. It says that Pinchas stood up and prayed. That's from Tehillim.
What would be the problem that both are true?
What? Well, actually, it's going to come with a hybrid in the end. We're going to see. Okay, so that's what. So we get vaya. So that's where we get the idea that Amidah, standing, means prayer. Yitzchak tiken tfilat mincha. Yitzchak was the one who created mincha. Shenemar vayetze Yitzchak lasuach basadil lifnot arev, because it says that Yitzchak went out. This is when Rivka is approaching and she sees him for the first time. It says he went out lasuach basadil, to talk in the fields as it was becoming evening. Lifnot arev. It wasn't night yet, which means it was late in the afternoon, which is the time of mincha. So somebody doesn't go out to talk to themselves in the field, at least we hope not. It means he was going out to pray. How do we know that talking means prayer? Because it says a prayer of a poor person who wraps himself up, and before Hashem he pours out his conversation. So sicha, conversation, is prayer. Yaakov tiken tefilat arvit. Yaakov was the one who established the prayer of the evening. Shenemar vayifga b'makom vayalen sham. Because it says he encountered the place and he stayed over. Ve'en pegi'ah elet tefillah. And to encounter something or to approach is prayer. Shenemar ve'atal titpalel ba'adam hazeh ve'al tisa ba'adam rinau tefillah. Because Hashem said, I believe that's to Yirmiyahu if I'm not mistaken. To Yirmiyahu, he said to him, do not pray for this people and do not raise for them rina'ut tefillah, any kind of praise or prayer, v'al tifgabi, and do not approach me. Because Hashem wanted to punish the people. He said, don't pray for them. Al tifgabi. So pgia, to approach Hashem, means to pray. So we have a hint for Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, for each one, that they established their respective prayers. V'tanya kivatei Rabbi Yosha ben Levi. And we also have a braita that supports Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, because it says because we said, why does the prayer of the morning go until midday? Because that was when the korban of the morning would go. The sacrifice of the morning could be offered until midday. And why is it that Rabbi Yehuda says only till the 4th hour? Because according to Rabbi Yehuda, you could only bring the morning korban till the 4th hour. Why does mincha go until sunset according to the rabbis? Because that was the deadline for offering the afternoon korban. Why does Rabbi Yehuda say only until an hour and a quarter before evening? Because because according to him, that was the deadline. An hour and a quarter before sunset was the latest that you could offer the afternoon korban. Why did they say that you can pray arvit all night? Because any limbs or different parts of korbanot that were not consumed during the day because there wasn't sufficient time burned throughout the night. Why did they say that you can say tfilat musaf on Shabbat all day long? Because the korban musaf could be brought all day long. Rabbi Yehuda omer ad sheva sha'ot, shari korban musaf karev olech ad sheva sha'ot. And what was the reason why Rabbi Yehuda said only until the 7th hour, meaning only until 1 o'clock you could say tfilat musaf? Because that was the deadline for the sacrifice of musaf according to him. So according to this braita, all of the times of prayer are set up to correspond to the times of offering the sacrifices. And even the arguments about when you can pray, up till when you can pray, are based on arguments about when you can offer the sacrifice. Okay? Ve'ezohi mincha gedolah. What is mincha gedolah? Mishesh sha'ot u'mechetza u'lemala. That's from 6.5 hours on, meaning from 12:30 on a perfect day and on. Ve'ezohi mincha kitana. What's mincha kitana? From 9.5 hours, meaning 3:30 and on. Okay? That's what mincha gedolah and mincha ketana are important for other reasons. Sometimes they become a factor. So Ibay Lahu, they asked the question, Rabbi Yehuda, pelag mincha kama ka'amar, or pelag mincha achrona ka'amar? When Rabbi Yehuda said pelag mincha, the half of the mincha, what did he mean? Did he mean the first half of the mincha, or did he mean the last half of the plag mincha? Okay, so Rashi says, what does he mean? What does it mean, plag mincha achrona. So it says chalak et bet sha'ot u'mechetza notarim bayom. I'm sorry, chalek et bet sha'ot u'mechetza notarim bayom. If you divide that last 2.5 hours of the day from 3:30 until 6 o'clock, v'nimtza plag acharon shel mincha miyud alef sha'ot chaser ravia ulemala. In other words, the last hour and a quarter of the day is what he means by the last half. The second to last hour and a quarter, from 3:30 to 4:45, would be the first half. So which one was he talking about? So he says, Tashema detani Rabbi Yehuda Omer Pelag mincha achrona amru v'hiyud alef sha'ot chaser ravia, that they meant the latter mincha, the latter half. In other words, it's not that he's saying that you can only say mincha until 3:30. That would be really early. He means you can say it until 4:45 on a perfect day. He didn't mean till the first half of that last 2.5 hours. He meant till the middle of that 2.5 hours, which is an hour and 15 minutes before the sunset on the perfect day. So then we say to conclude, Nema tevet yuvte to Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Chanina. Is this Braita not a contradiction or a refutation of Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Chanina? Because we see that all of these times for the prayers are based on sacrifices. So very nice that he says Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov were involved here. But how can he say that the prayer is based on that when we have all of these detailed rules of prayer that clearly come from the rules of sacrifices? So the Gemara answers and basically creates a hybrid between the two positions that Amar lach Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Chanina. Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Chanina will say to you, Le'olam emalach. Really, I'll tell you, tefilot avot tiknum. The concept of shacharit, the concept of mincha, the concept of arvit, these come from the patriarchs. However, va'asmechinu rabbanan akorbanot. But the rabbis, when they determine the halachot of prayer, they don't have halachot from Avraham Avinu. They're going to ask Avraham Avinu what the halachot of shacharit are. They're going to ask Yaakov Avinu. They're not, they didn't have technical halachot. When they had to establish zmanim, times, they based it upon the korbanot. And in fact, you have to say this. Why? The ilote mahachi, if you don't assume that there's at least some role that korbanot play here, then tefilat musaf, the Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Chanina, mantikna, who established tefilat musaf? Was there a fourth patriarch, a secret fourth patriarch, like the extra beetle, something like that, who was involved in establishing the tefilat musaf? No, musaf is clearly based on the idea of the korban, of the sacrifice, the extra sacrifice that there was on Rosh Chodesh, on holidays, and on Shabbat. So obviously one of the patriarchs did not establish that. So even Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Chanina has to acknowledge that there's some role that the sacrifices play in establishing tefillot. Because he has to account for the existence of tefillat musaf. Rather, ela tefillot avot tiknum va'asmechenu rabbanan akorbanot. Rather, the only machloket is between Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi and Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Chanina is who was the originator of the three tefillot. According to Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Chanina, we go further back. And we go to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. According to Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, the whole concept of three tefillot comes from the Bet HaMikdash, from the sacrifices. But everybody agrees that the sacrifices play a role in establishing the halachot of tefillah, particularly with the zmanim, with the times, and with tefillat musaf, whose whole existence only makes sense because of the korbanot. Chazak u'baruch.